All right. Good morning, everybody. Slurping coffee with Jesus, getting into the word of his Father, learning about him and life and everything in between. So, we're in the Old Testament book of Job. And today, we're going to go through chapter 30. And so, just a reminder that chapter 29, 30, and 31 are Job's final discussion to his first three friends. All right. And so, yesterday, Job looked really hard or talked really hard about the dignity that he used to have, the high esteem that the people held him in. But they held him that way because he was faithful to God and because he took care of the people. Good morning, Audrey. Because he loved the people, because he was a steward of of God's creation and the shepherd for the people that God gave him. Good morning, Carrie. Happy belated birthday. Um, and so this is kind of what we saw. Good morning, Stella. Yesterday, again, who Job used to be, the high regard that everybody held him in. But it wasn't from a bravado statement. It was literally from a, I just do what the Lord tells me to do, and I follow his commandments. And so what we saw in yesterday's reading was again a glimpse of what Jesus will ultimately, who Jesus will minister to. And so that was the role through yesterday, was the dignity of Job's position when he walked with God. And so this is completely counter to a prosperity gospel. Kind of sounds like it initially. God blesses Job. But God doesn't bless Job with things. He blesses Job with strength and with love and with compassion and with the strength to stand up to injustices, so on and so forth. So now, today, Job is transitioning into where he's at today. And so yesterday he talked about all the people that held him in high regard. Today, those he's going to talk about how those people handle him today. All right, and so that's where we pick up. So we're in, like I said, we're in the book, the Old Testament book of Job, chapter 30. All right. And so 20, let me just start real quick with verse 25 in chapter 29. It ended with, I chose the way for them and sat as their chief. I dwelt as a king among his troops. I was like one who comforts mourners. All right. And so that's where 29 ended. Morning, Cheryl. 30 picks up, but now, all right. So now today, but now they mock me. Men younger than I, whose father I would have disdained to put with my sheepdogs. All right. And so dogs in that time aren't like dogs today. Dogs today are pets, cherished. I mean, it drives me nuts when people call them my fur babies. It's just, I just, anyway, and so on and so forth. And so, I just buried a dog last spring. He was my best friend. I loved him to death. But that's not how dogs were back then, and not for these people. Dogs are the lowest of the low. We even see that in Jesus's time, addressing one of the ladies, and so this is not a good thing. So the men who were beneath the dogs, as Job saying this, the men that I held in such disdain that I wouldn't have put them with my dogs, their children are now mocking me. All right, and this is going to be the tone of the entire discussion today. Now, of what you so this breaks down in a couple sections. And so what we're going to see is how they disrespect him, all right? And so or who they are and why they're not. Then we're going to see, so we see these people, young men, disdained, and yet we're going to see why they're disdained. Then we're going to see how they mock him, and then we're going to come back to God. All right. That's kind of the breakdown of the chapter. And so in verse 2, of what use was the strength of their hands to me, since their vigor had gone from them? All right. So they weren't employable by Job. They held no value to Job for any work or skills that they had. They were lazy, they were unemployed. Haggard from want and hunger, they roam the parched land and desolate wastelands at night. And so these men who hold him in no regard and mock him now are the same men. These are the complete outsiders. Job is now basically what he's going to say in this chapter. I'm an outsider even amongst outsiders. That's how far he has fallen from being the chief at the gate, at the city gate. And so these men, despite the fact that they don't work, they don't want to work, they can't work, and so they live like animals. In the brush, they gathered salt herbs, and their food was the root of the broom bush. So they're only eating things that are like emergency rations for everybody else. Nobody likes these things. These aren't things that work their way into daily diets or became crops or anything like this. They ate what people survived off of in the wilderness. They were banished from human society, shouted as if they were thieves. They were forced to live in the dry stream beds among the rocks and in the holes in the ground. They brayed among the bushes and huddled in the undergrowth. A base and nameless brood, they were driven out of the land. Again, these are the men mocking Job now. And so some of Job's decisions as a city elder, a judge, somebody of importance at the city gate, may even have led to some of this. And yet, these men now mock him. He's below these people. And so Job is telling a story to say how far he has fallen. Now in verse 9 through 15, we're going to see how they do this. And so in verse 9, and now these young men mock me in song. I have become a byword among them. So imagine they're actually making up songs about Job as he's huddled in the trash dump now outside the city gate, outside the city walls, because he's unclean. He's the uncleanest of the unclean. And so now they sit around at days, they mock him, throw stones, sing songs about him, and then drift away. Come back, do it over and over again. Now they detest me and keep their distance. They do not hesitate to spit in my face. Now that God has unstrung my bow and afflicted me, they throw off restraint in my presence. All right. Now that he is no longer a man of means, they have no fear of him. All right. They didn't respect his heart and his mercy that we saw he had, that why so many gave him dignity. And now that all that's been stripped, there's no fear of him either. And so this is how they behave around him. Think about this from an atheist, a non-believer, a casual Christian, an agnostic perspective as well. Don't we do this to God? You know, when we think about how many people get so up in arms and attack Christians about a God they think doesn't even exist. All right. So, and I always use this as an example. I don't argue with anybody about Santa Claus. I don't argue at all. We all know he doesn't exist, that he doesn't deliver toys and presents, through the whole world on Christmas night, so on and so forth. Was he a real character? Absolutely. He was a saint, a priest at one time in Turkey who took care of a village and became a legend. Got all that. But we don't argue that he's real, because he's not real. There's no point in arguing about something that's not real. And yet these people who say God is not real, say Jesus didn't exist, will argue to the last breath about that. No fear. But yet they're arguing about something that doesn't exist, which means in their heart of hearts, they know he exists. And so this is kind of how these people are behaving towards Job. There's no fear. On my right, the tribe attacks. They lay snares for my feet. They build their siege. Where's it at? They build their siege ramps against me. All right. Now, the Hebrew word for tribe, there's a note here, and I try to bring out the notes whenever I can. It's not often enough, unfortunately. But again, this word is uncertain in most definitions. All right. And so this group is considered a tribe. That's the best way to look at it. And they attack him. All right. They're setting up ramps. They set up snares. So they're always on the attack, and he always has to be careful. All right. That's what this is. And so, how many of you have been in toxic environments, family, work, school, wherever, where you knew somebody's spirit was going to attack you constantly? And so whenever you were in the presence or came into that environment, you literally were exhausted when you left because you were on guard constantly. That's where Job's at. All right. They break up my road. They succeed in destroying me. No one can help me, they say. Can help him, they say. They advance as through a gaping breach. Amid the ruins, they come rolling in. And so they use siege descriptions here, warfare, siege warfare, because this is a warfare of them against Job. And so even when they're talking to him, nobody's going to protect you. You're all alone, old man. You're ours. And so here's a beacon of what society was to these young men, to these outsiders. And so here now he's been stripped of all that, but he's a target for them because he's still Listen to this. He's still a poster child for that system, for that. And so, although Job thinks he's being punished by God, we know he's not. We know that there's something much deeper going on. What we do see is that their spirits are recoiling against the spirit of Job, and the fact that God does love Job, and the fact that God did what his whole life was loved by God. And so he still represents that. They still see that. They still recognize Job as that, despite the fact that he's living beneath them now, despite the fact that they can attack him. They're still recoiling from the light that Job's very life represents in the way he lived and the way he continues to. He refuses to curse God. These are people who would curse God. And so even in his suffering, there's a redemption. And that's what this chapter is about. Amen. Now, so terrors, he ends this section with terrors overwhelm me. My dignity is driven away as by the wind. My safety vanishes like a cloud. And so there were two major assaults on Job by Satan. The first in chapter 1 was to remove everything from him, all the things he loved, all the material things, his children. The second attack was on his health. And so this is what he's talking about here in verse 15. Terrors overwhelm me. My dignity is driven away by the wind. I have no dignity anymore. My positions, my authorities, all the things that I had were gone. My safety vanishes like a cloud. He is literally at the whim of these outsiders, of these people who are less than dogs. And so, and amidst all that, his body is decaying as he day by day as he watches because of the sores. Can't eat, can't sleep, can't do anything. The pain is agony. We're going to see that here in a second. And so now he's going to flow back into God's words. He's going to bring it back, and he's going to talk about his suffering. All right. And he's going to ask again one of the big questions of the book of Job. Verse 16, and now my life ebbs away. Days of suffering grip me. Night pierces my bones. My gnawing pains never rest. Now, Job has lamented in prior in Job about how bad the nights are. The nights seem never ending. How many of us have been ill? COVID's a great example. One of the overarching symptoms of COVID is the fact that it's worse at night. And that's with any kind of pain. When the house is quiet, when there's nothing to distract you, when you're trying not to keep anybody else awake, and yet your pain is front and center, and it seems like the night lasts forever when you can't sleep. That's where Job's at. His days are long. The days of suffering grip me. They're long, but the night pierces my bones. And he said before that the night seems to never end, the darkness. In his great power, God becomes like clothing to me. Now, the NIV, I think, mistranslates this. It doesn't change it doesn't change the narrative, but it changes kind of the impact of it. And so these words actually say God grabs me by the clothing. Whereas here, God becomes like clothing to me, and he binds me like a neck of my garment. And so the more powerful image is God grabbing him by the clothing and twisting to the point where, when you grab somebody's clothes and they start to bunch up and they start to pull in their neck. And so God's there. He's talking about God and his suffering. He throws me into the mud and I am reduced to dust and ashes. Again, he's talking about God. He throws me into the mud. From the dust we came, and from the dust we will return. So God is getting ready to take Job's life. That's where Job's at now. All right. The suffering's horrible. It's going to be coming to an end. And so there is some mercy in that. We've seen Job talk about death constantly from the very beginning of his suffering. If only I could die now before I do anything stupid or before I break. Verse 20, here it is. I cry out to you, God, but you do not answer. I stand up, but you merely look at me. You turn on me ruthlessly with the might of your hand, you attack me. Let me stop there because it goes on. And so what we see here is, listen at verse 20, I cry out to you, God, but you do not answer. And in fact, verse 21 means you attack me relentlessly. Not only do you not answer me, but you double down on your judgment against me. The punishment is too harsh. The suffering is incredible. And my suffering only increases while you remain silent. This is the heart of us in our seasons. And so, ladies, I've talked to several of you that, before, and I know that you're in seasons, and I know that this can seem this way, but there's a redemption in suffering. Think about how much Jesus must have felt like Job those final 24 hours. A sinless man, blameless, and not just blameless and upright, but legitimately, literally sinless, mocked, cursed, spit on, beaten, flayed, and then hung naked on a cross for the whole world to see. Redemption. God was silent through that until he breathed his last breath. And his last words were, "Forgive them, they know not what they do." And then God splits the curtain. And then there's an eclipse. Darkness comes over the land. Creation groans. And so often in our suffering, we're still caught in our own suffering because it is impactful for us. It's hard to see anything beyond it. And this is where Job's at, just like many of us get to that point. And so what we have to understand, though, is God has a purpose and a plan even in the suffering. It's not helpful. It's easier to say than to live. I get it. I know it. We're all going to go through this. As Christians, we're all going to go through these moments. Job was a faithful man. He loved God, believed in God with all his heart. And yet I cry out to you, God, but you do not answer. In verse 22, you snatch me up and drive me before the wind. You toss me about in the storm. I know you will bring me down to death, to a place appointed for all the living. All right. And so now there's another trend. So Job is talking about his ultimate suffering. But here's the heart of the book of Job. I'm suffering and you do not answer. In fact, not only do you not answer, but you double down and it's getting worse. Why? Why? And he goes on in verse 24, surely no one lays a hand on a broken man when he cries out for help in distress. So we're going to go back now to Job, because Job is going to now kind of compare when I came across people like this, like me, that I'm living today. Job, the old Job, if the Job of what we're reading about today, the suffering Job, came into the presence of the blessed Job, this is what Job's going to describe in the rest of this chapter. Have I not wept for those in trouble? Has not my soul grieved for the poor? Yet when I hoped for good, so when it was now my turn to be in those positions, yet when I hoped for good, evil came. When I looked for light, then came darkness. The churning inside me never stops. Days of suffering confront me. I go about blackened, but not by the sun. And so his skin condition is getting so much worse. His flesh is literally rotting, sores. He's fighting to keep the flies off. They're laying eggs. I hate to paint the picture, but it needs to be painted to understand how bad his suffering is. He can't stand, he can't lay down, he can't sit, he can't do anything. That's how covered he is in sores. All right. And so his flesh is literally dying, blackening. The churning inside me never stops. Days of suffering confront me. I go about blackened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. I have become a brother of jackals, a companion of owls. My skin grows black and peels. My body burns with fever. My lyre is turned to mourning and my pipe to the sounds of wailing. And so what we see here is Job. He's about at the end of his rope. His friends came to comfort him and turned into convicting him. Now he's talking about how his daily life is lived in this dump where even the people of the dump treat him like he's the low. He's cried out for God. He said, God, I've honored you. I've loved you. I've done all of these things. When people came to me like me, I comforted them in your name. Where are you, my God? And so what we're going to see with time, we don't see it today. Job won't either. And so tomorrow we're going to continue this conversation. Then there's going to be one more attack, and then God is going to speak. So this conversation most likely occurred over a morning, probably no longer than a day. The friends showed up and they sat silent for 7 days, and then Job spoke. And that speaking stirred a conversation that lasted maybe a day, at best 2 days, but most likely just a day or less. And in the span of this waffling that Job rightfully, humanly does, God is going to answer him in his suffering, through his suffering. His suffering is redemptive. Job will end up being blessed. And so Job doesn't have Christ, though. He's long before the Messiah is to come. But we live post-Messiah. We already live in the blessing. Our suffering already has an end. And this is what, as Christians, we have to understand today. So many people like to go to Job about suffering, but the reality is Job's not the greatest example for a Christian about suffering. He's a great teacher about suffering. He's a great teacher about the need for something else to help with the suffering, but we already have that something else, and his name is Jesus Christ in all things. Our treasures are now stored in heaven. Our dignity is going to be in the throne room of God. Our dignity was bloodied, mocked, and spit on before he went to the cross. Our dignity conquered the grave and is sitting at the right hand of God, the Creator, the Almighty. Amen? That's what we have to remember in these moments. There is a redemption for us in our suffering. Paul sums it up best when he talks about where he's telling he has a thorn in his side, never says what it is. And he prays to God 3 times to remove the thorn. And God says, no. Paul's suffering. Paul, the strongest man in the Bible, most likely. Paul, suffering. Actually, David probably is the strongest. Paul is suffering, and he prays to God 3 times, and God says, no, in your weakness, I am your strength. It is in your weakness that I'm glorified. It's your weakness that I seek you, but you seek me. That's the purpose of suffering. Even as Christians, there's no magic to Christianity that once you accept Christ, you're not going to suffer anymore. Job was blameless and upright, and the accuser went after him, the adversary of God and our accuser. So until that second fall out of heaven for Satan, when he's banned from heaven, he's our accuser. And so, but in this, in our weakness, in these moments, think about Job. If only there was an intercessor in heaven. If only there was a redeemer. If only I could die, Lord, before my physical strength saps my spiritual strength. Job is the right example for us as Christians to know, but we've got to understand that we live under the new covenant, and Job did not. He lived under the Mosaic covenant, the law. That's the power of this moment. That's the redemption that's in our suffering. And our suffering brings us to the ultimate weakness where we have to rely on the strength of God or we break. A choice. And it is a choice. As hard as that is to comprehend, as hard as people want to disagree with that, it is a choice. As I tell people all the time, I used to have this cool dive shirt, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. 100%. Amen. And so that wraps us up today. Tomorrow we'll continue this thread. We're going to see how Job matriculates through this process. He's speaking out loud. He's speaking from the heart today. But today is, God, why are you not listening? And in fact, why are you doubling down on this? Because Job doesn't know what we know, that there was a heavenly council. Job doesn't know what we know, that there is a Messiah and that he has come and that he has died conquering sin, that he left the grave conquering death, which is the wages of sin, and now has ascended to the right hand of the Father and will return. You can't not believe that he'll return and believe all the other things. It's a package deal. Amen. And so that's where we kind of take it today. And so we'll wrap up. As always, I love you guys. I pray that the peace of the Lord, the peace that allows us in the suffering to lean into God, to take his strength, to rely on him, despite not being able to see or feel him, to walk by faith and not by sight. May that peace rest upon you, your families, and your homes. And until we meet again tomorrow, may the Lord bless you and your families with safety and good health. Amen, amen, and amen. All right, brothers and sisters, you guys have a great day. Ladies, I know several of you are struggling. Just know we're praying for you, and just keep leaning into God. That's all we can do. Amen. All right, brothers and sisters, you guys have a blessed day, and share the gospel. Stay in prayer. Stay in prayer for each other. Pray for me, even. Pray for everybody. All right. Have a good day. Take care.